All right, howdy everybody. Welcome to the February joint meeting between the Greater Dallas and Fort Worth sections of TechSite. For those of you that don't know me, I am Joseph Marchione. I am the current president of the Dallas TechSite section. I'd like to thank everybody from both Dallas and Fort Worth for showing up today. And I would especially like to thank those of you that are coming in from the STech, TPWA, and any other guests that are here specifically for this presentation today. Robert Saylor has been a member of the National Committee on Uniform Traffic Control Devices since 2016. He serves on the Signal Technical Committee, the Research Committee, the Connected and Automated Vehicle Task Force, and the Rules of the Road Task Force. Robert is a former president of the Dallas TechSite section and currently serves as the district's liaison to student chapters. Robert graduated from the University of Texas at Arlington in 1991 with his bachelor's in aerospace engineering. In 30 years since he's worked in traffic and transportation at Texas Transportation Institute, the cities of Arlington, Fort Worth, Richardson, and now the city of Plano as the senior transportation engineer. And with that, Robert, I would like to throw it over to you.
So I want to thank everybody for joining me for this. Hopefully we'll get through it and everybody will be more knowledgeable on the other side, including myself. One of the things that I need to express before we get started is that even though I am a member of the National Committee on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, the information that I'm presenting today is not, the views are strictly my own and they're not necessarily representative of views endorsed by the National Committee. I am not here as a representative of the committee, and I have to make that clear. So with that, let's get started. So, Notice of Proposed Amendment. Let me explain. December 13th of last year, FHWA issued their Notice of Proposed Amendment to update the MUTCD. This will be the first FHWA revision to the MUTCD since the 2009 manual. It will be titled the 11th edition when it comes out and is made as a rule. And that's 11 editions since the first edition was published in 1935. MUTCD is the book that we all know and love is adopted by reference under Title 23 of the Code of Federal Regulations. And so that'll be a point I'll bring up in a minute. Once the final rulemaking is completed and published, then states have 2 years to adopt the MUTCD. And there are 3 options that they can follow. They can either adopt the manual as is, they can adopt the manual along with a state supplement, or the state can adopt a manual that is in substantial compliance with the national manual, and the FHWA defines what substantial compliance is. That's the case with the state of Texas. We have our own state manual. You can see the numbers of how the 50 states and 2 districts break down. Now, there are certain slides that I know everybody who signed up for this presentation wants to see. And this is probably one of those, but I'm going to tell you, ignore this slide. This is not the slide you're looking for. The question of, how do I get the NPA? How do I look at it? How do I, read it to see what's in there for myself? These are the 2 links that are generally put out. But this is not the real situation. Here's the slide you want, and I'm going to be on this slide for a little bit, so you can take screen captures or pictures with your phone or whatever.
Robert, this is Brian. This presentation is going to be made available early next week online. We'll send the link out to everybody that's on this call.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. So the first twist in your journey, if you want to analyze the notice of proposed amendment for what the new ruling may be, is that there are actually 22 different documents you will need to review to figure that out. The first document, that first link that ends in 01 and was on the previous slide, that is the link to the actual notice that FHWA published in the Federal Register. It is a summary of changes that FHWA feels were important in the update. That is 647 comments long. And those comments are very mixed. Some of them are very specific and relate to a specific section or a specific paragraph. Some of them are very broad that cover half a chapter or an entire chapter. So that 647 comments is a little misleading as far as, how much material is there. The other issue is, and we found this on the Signals Technical Committee as we've done our analysis on our part, is very many of the significant changes that are being proposed are not mentioned in the FHWA summary comments. So just reading the summary of changes is really not going to give you any indication of the actual changes that are being presented. So that takes us to the next link, the one that ends in 38 up there. At that link, you'll find 2 PDF documents, which are the proposed text of the new manual. There's 2 versions. There's the clean version, and then there's the text markup version. The markup version shows the existing manual with red strikeouts for things that are being removed and blue underline for new text that's being added. The markup version is 781 pages long, and the clean version is 697 pages long. The next twist in this is that neither of those versions includes any of the proposed figures or tables. So as you're going through it, if you see a reference to a figure or to a table, you have to go to another set of documents. The link that you see on the screen that ends in 05, that will take you to a page that has the 9 PDFs, one for each part, for figures in each of those 9 parts. So far, all 3 of those top 3 links are available on the docket submission by Federal Highways at regulations.gov. The 4th link, which is the link to the proposed tables that ends in 06, as you see on your screen, that is not linked any place on the regulations.gov website. You can get to the table, the proposed tables, if you know this URL, but without it, you can't get there. Now, and it's critical that you look at the tables as well, because there are significant spots in the proposed rule where FHWA has taken text that is in the current manual, moved that to information in a table, and deleted the text out of the proposed rule. So the only place that information will reside is in a table. The other thing, once you've got your texts and tables, now, and I will bring up another caveat that the regulations.gov website is set for a major overhaul and upgrade on February 18th, so 6 days from now. Hopefully that will go well and everything will be there and all the links will work. And in fact, this table link should come up at that point. Being a technology upgrade, if it goes sideways, then maybe nothing will work. We don't know. But just be aware, February 18th, the look and feel of the website will change. I actually got that last link because at the National Committee, we've actually been using the beta test site for the new regulations.gov for the last 2 months. So anyway, so that is there. The last of your 22 documents you will need is your favorite copy of the current Texas MUTCD, because the Texas MUTCD is different in places from the current 2009 federal manual that the text markup and text clean documents are actually based off of. So once you've got those 22 documents, now you can start doing some analysis. Let's go over the process of what to expect moving forward. So first, I want to express the notice of proposed amendment is not the final rule. It will change it, and that's a good thing. And we'll go over some of the expected changes and differences that you can expect here in a moment. One of the things that many people don't understand or realize or know is that the MUTCD is actually authored and produced by a 6-member team within the FHWA. These 6 folks are, to all intents and purposes, the author of the MUTCD. The National Committee provides requests for changes and provides information and suggestions to the team, but those 6 folks at FHWA are the ones that actually produce the manual. Each one of those 6 members is responsible for 2 to 3 parts, and they have complete authority and control over those parts within their scope. And that'll be important in a minute as I explain some of the changes. One of the things is that the current 6-member team has experienced a lot of retirements and turnover over the last 4 years. I don't believe that any of the current members of the team were part of the team back when the 2009 manual was issued. So each of the new folks is putting their particular stamp and style on the parts that they're in charge of. So with that, we'll move forward to what's the schedule look like. So the notice of proposed amendment was posted on December 13th of last year. And initially the comment period was to go through March 15th, next month. A lot of organizations, AASHTO, ITE, National Committee, several others requested extensions varying from 30 days to 90 days. And on February 2nd, the FHWA extended the comment period to May 14th. So we got an extra 60 days on that. So that's a good thing. After the comment period closes, the process is that 6-member FHW team will have to analyze all of the comments that came in, determine if there are valid points and edits that need to be made to the documents that were in the NPA. Once they finalize that, and the current team tells us they expect that to take 6 to 9 months. Based on the experience of the 2009 manual and the opinions of former team members who are currently on the National Committee, they think that it's closer to 9 to 12 months for them to do that comment analysis. So take the 6 to 12 month time range, and knowing how us government workers work, make your own choice there. After all of those edits are done by the team, then it will go for internal FHWA review by the Office of Management and Budget, and the Office of the Secretary of Transportation. That takes about 4 months for all of those external reviews to happen, and get the comments back and resolve any issues by the team. Once everybody has approved it at that level, then the team will put it together to go back onto the docket in the Federal Register as a final rule. That takes about 5 months. So given that timeline, you can expect the new version somewhere between November of 2022 and February of 2023. So this is still a long ways off before we get the new manual published, but it is, the comment period ends shortly. Here's just a simple graphic, and I stole this slide from a National Committee slide deck, but it shows the entire process of updating the MUTCD and where we are now. If everything goes smoothly from the time that FHWA completes their draft of everything that they think they want to change to the time that states have it all approved, that can be up to 64 months to update the manual. Now, in this case, it's taken us 12 years and probably another year or two before we get that done. Moving forward. All right, so back to the process. Once again, NPA is not the final rule. It will change. That's a good thing. Some of the things that definitely will change will be editorial changes. Just in our analysis of the Part 4, we've found word misspellings, grammar changes that need to be done. We've found sentences that had words completely missing. Obviously there were 2 or 3 words that it's obvious what they should have been, but they just weren't there in the text. So those, and we're making comments and bringing those to the attention of the FHWA team. However, in at least one case, we've found where a paragraph was moved from an option statement in one section and integrated into a guidance statement in another section. The problem is that the guidance statement was permissive in a you shall do such and such, but the option statement that had been moved up was restrictive, saying you shall not do such and such. And so that creates a conflict. It's obvious the intent is that the paragraph that was moved needs to be altered and edited to be, take the permissive form. But if it went out as is, it would create a conflict in the manual. All of those changes are precisely what the NPA and comment period are supposed to discover and bring up. The FHW team are humans. They know they make mistakes. This is the way that they can ensure that a large number of eyes get to point out their mistakes and get them fixed before they become final rules. Now, beyond that level of change, some of the more difficult changes that may happen is there are a lot of new standard statements. And some of the new standard statements are brand new, language that has never been in the manual before. Some of them are options, guidances, or support statements that have been elevated to a new standard. In all of those cases, if the comments that FHWA receives convince them that there are unintended consequences or consequences that they didn't think of that are highly detrimental, then the team can either remove the standard or reduce the standard down to guidance, option, or support. That's totally within the scope of what the NPA does. The third part also involves standards, and that is there are existing standard statements in the 2009 manual, some of which have been removed and some of which have been downgraded to guidance or options or support. If in the commentary, somebody can point out a reason why those statements should still be in as standards, the team can restore an existing standard as a standard in the final rule. That's within the scope. What's not within the scope of the NPA is putting a brand new standard that is not in the 2009 manual and was not shown as a standard in the NPA. And if you go onto the NPA website to browse the comments that have already been submitted, you'll see a lot of people that their favorite option in the 2009 manual was not upgraded to a standard in the NPA. And so they're, requesting the team upgrade that to a standard. Any request like that is just going to be discarded out of hand. Unless there is so much of that and it's so egregious that the FHWA decides that they need to pull the entire NPA and start from the beginning. That would mean starting back at the beginning of the 64 months on this slide. Nobody wants that to happen. So do not expect to see anything that is not a standard either in the 2009 manual or the NPA to be elevated to a standard in the final rule. Now we'll start actually diving into the reality of what's being proposed. First, the good news. 75% of the proposed changes are purely editorial and cosmetic. They have really no effect on the profession as a whole or how we operate or what we do out on the street. So that's good that the majority is not very affecting us on the street. Some of the non-editorial changes are clarifying language. There's been a lot of, there are a lot of places in the 2009 manual where rules are fairly ambiguous. And so the FHWA has made an effort over the last 12 years based on comments and requests to add clarifying language in a lot of places. And in most of those clarifying language situations, it does not change the commonly perceived intent of that section. So that's a good thing to get extra clarity. There are a lot of improvements in the NPA over the 2009 manual. There are things that as technology has changed, as society has changed, needed to be in the manual, needed to be authorized, or needed to be regulated and restricted that just wasn't covered. So the new update is a huge benefit, gets us much further along to where we need to be. Also, a lot of the substantive changes that are in the NPA are based off of existing FHWA official rulings, interpretations, interim approvals, and memorandum. So these are all things that we should already know and be following. So that got, those are now official in the manual. Also, there's some existing federal legislation that overrides the 2000 manual. And so adjustments have been made to accommodate that. That is mostly some OSHA issues and ADA issues, and it's mostly in the temporary traffic control part, but there may be some other areas where federal legislation has induced changes in the proposed amendment. Additionally, there are some NTSB recommendations on some crashworthiness and things like that that have been incorporated into the new manual. Of course, there are official change requests by the National Committee that have piled up over 12 years, and a lot of those have been incorporated in the new manual. And then finally, USDOT and AASHTO have sponsored a lot of research on a lot of topics over the last 12 years. And so portions of the manual are being proposed to update based on the results of that research. So that's the good news. The bad news. Many of the, and I mentioned the first one earlier, many of the proposed substantive changes are not mentioned in the register comment and can only be found by detailed reading of the proposed text. This is brutal. I'll tell you up front. Also, many of the substantive changes in the text have never been seen or discussed outside of the FHWA team, as far as we know. They have never been presented to the committee for debate or discussion. They just hadn't been seen. And many of the changes don't come with a comment or any supporting research to show that those are valid, safe, and useful, which is one of the criteria that the National Committee tries to use in our requested changes. So there's going to be a lot of discussion on a lot of those elements. Next, comments by the FHWA in the markup version. And I'm going to move to the next slide on this. And this is what the markup version looks like. This is a typical page. There's 781 pages of exactly this in the markup version that you would be looking at. And what you see here, anything that's in black is currently in the 2009 manual and is not being proposed to change. Anything that's in red strikeout is being removed. Anything that's blue underline is new text being added. The green highlight you see is a comment by FHWA on what they're doing with that edit. And then the yellow highlight is how they designate figures and tables that will have to be included in, by the other document later. One of the things that I'm going to point out here, and I'm not going to read a whole lot of what's in the new NPA, but this is a good example, typical example. So the note from FHWA says this was incorporated into the guidance above. Now remember, support is just information. Option is you may do something. Guidance is you should do something. And a standard is you shall do something. And so they're removing an option, a may and information. And I'm going to read this. The legend for the next exit plaque may be displayed in either one or two lines as shown in the figure. The one-line message on the next exit plaque is the more desirable choice unless the message causes the sign to have a horizontal dimension greater than that of the advanced guide sign. Now that's pretty clear. Pretty easy to understand, pretty easy to apply. That has been incorporated into the new guidance statement above. And I'm going to read this and all of you figure out whether this is an improvement on the option and support. And remember, this is a should statement, not a may statement. So it's even stronger worded. Where the next exit plaque is used, the E2-1P plaque should be used where the width of the advanced guide sign is equal to or greater than the width of the E2-1P plaque. The E2-1AP plaque should be used where the width of the E2-1P plaque exceeds the width of the advanced guide sign. Now, first to me, that is not necessarily, certainly not clearer. And I don't feel that captures the intent of the option and support statement it's replacing. There's no mention about single lines being more desirable, or why you would go to double lines. And this is just, this is not a particularly important rule. It's really not even a change to anything that we do now, except that in a lot of our opinions, folks that I've talked with, it's this type of change that makes things less clear and more complicated. So that was just one example. And really, I brought this up to show what the markup version looks like. Next, more bad news. So in the current manual and in the proposed amendment manual, throughout, references are made to specific paragraph numbers. So you will see a standard that states this standard is applicable except for conditions as described in paragraphs 5 through 8. And so you have to go down to 5 through 8 to see what those exceptions are. And that's continued in the NPA. However, neither the markup or clean text versions includes any paragraph numbers. So when you're looking at something like this and trying to count paragraphs, 20, 30 paragraphs down in a section, that can be difficult. Another general issue, and I mentioned this before, neither of the text versions have the figures or tables included. In addition, when you go look at the figures and text files that are provided separately, frequently you will find figures or tables that don't exist in the proposed. They're referred to in the text, but they don't exist in the other file. That's going to have to be resolved. In addition, the tables and figures that are presented by those links I provided earlier are clean versions. So they don't show what the previous version was and what's being changed. So the only way to do that comparison is to bring up their clean version proposed and look at the current manual and compare those side by side to see what changed. And honestly, to do that for all of the tables and all of the figures is well beyond anything that I'm going to have time to look at. At the National Committee, what each of the technical committees, we have a technical committee for each part, and each technical committee has been tasked with going through all of the text and all of the figures and all of the tables in their part to look for errors and provide comment. So somebody is looking at that, but be aware that's a huge task. And finally, on the bad news, over the 12 years, the National Committee has requested a lot of official changes, things to improve safety, improve clarity, add opportunities, restrict things that are practices that have been seen that shouldn't be allowed, things like that. Most of the official requests for change seem to have been incorporated in the new manual, but there are some significant requests that have not been included. And so the National Committee will be addressing those in our comments as well. Now's the time for actually my little bit of a soapbox for the next couple slides. And it has to do with the bigger issue of the update overall. So one of the, I mentioned earlier that each of the 6 team members has their own style and that they have different styles and priorities and may have been given different direction than the team was given back for the 2009 manual. One of the things that they have done in an effort to make things clearer is completely reorganize almost all of the existing material. So sections that have, that were in one chapter are moved entirely to a different chapter. and entirely new sections have been created to better, what they feel is better organize common concepts. So that can be a good or a bad thing, but it does make following what's happened much more difficult. And it also means when the new manual comes out, there's going to be a period of confusion because things that you expect to be in one place aren't going to be there. So you're going to have to hunt through the manual to figure out where they got moved to in the new manual. Now I'll go, the most obvious of the alterations is Part 5. And Part 5 in the current manual is traffic control on low volume roads. FHWA team had already been discussing eliminating that part because it was essentially redundant. And in this case, that's what they've done is they've taken all of that traffic control on low volume roads and distributed it through the rest of the manual. So low volume, signs on low volume roads is now in the signs part. Signals is in the signals. Markings is in the markings part. As just either additional options or additional guidance where appropriate in those other parts when it comes to low volume roads. In removing that, FHWA has replaced it with a new Part 5 specifically for automated vehicles. So there's new information in that section that is very obvious. It's also, that's a large part that was not vetted through anybody outside FHWA as far as we know. And I'll get to that Part 5 here in a minute when I get into more specifics. The more subtle and significant alteration in the manual is at some point, and this is just based on comments that the team has made, that I've heard around the committee, is that they were given a directive to reduce the size of the manual, that it was getting too large, and in part too complex, but mostly was, it needed to be smaller. So the response to that seems to have been a very comprehensive effort to eliminate anything that is redundant text. The problem with this is that many people that use the manual only use a particular part. If you have an agency sign shop, your sign guys may only look at Part 2. Many school districts only look at Part 7, school area. Signals, your signal shop guys probably know Part 4 on signals, but they may not know Part 1 or Part 2 on signs. The previous philosophy in 2009 and by the FHW team was to ensure that each chapter, at least each part, was standalone. So if you grabbed Part 3 markings and were reading through that, at the very beginning of that, there would be things from the general part, Part 1 general, that apply specifically to markings. And so that would be repeated. And for any time that there was a section that had another part of the manual that affected it, there would usually be a call out at least to that other section. Go make sure you look at this other section because it's relevant. Almost all of that has been eliminated. In addition, frequently in the 2009 manual, as you read through it, you'll find support statements that go beyond explaining the specific traffic control device that they're referring to, but give some of the history or some of the reasoning or logic for the restriction or permission to use that device or not use that device. FHWA has looked at most of that and decided that if it does not directly relate specifically to the operation, design, or implementation of a traffic control device, it needs to be deleted. So as you scroll through the markup version, you will see pages of marked out red that were deleted that are just, the FHWA comment is deleted as redundant. And it will no longer be in the manual. Personally, I feel that this is a detriment to the profession. The new philosophy is that you as a practitioner, if you're reading in section 8 on railroads and there's something in markings or in general or in signs that applies to your situation that you're looking at in 8, well, you should have read all the way through the manual down to 8, so you should already know what's up there and how it applies to this situation, without reference or repeating. I think that this is going to make things much more difficult for us, as well as the a lot of times if we had a section that referenced a certain part of a different reference source material, an ITE practice or an AASHTO green book or something like that, many times in the current manual, that text would have been copied into the MUTCD rather than making a practitioner go and pull out the green book and find the relevant section. All of that's been removed. If it's in a reference document, FHWA probably has put in a note to check that reference document, but the text is not in line anymore, easy for you to just see as you're doing it. So my final paragraph here, the result is a lot of the knowledge inherent in the manual has been removed in the proposed amendment. It is a more functional document. Everything that you find in there is directly related to a specific traffic control device, but that's at the cost of it not being as much of a knowledge base or as of a training tool. That there's much less of the why we do things the way we do in it. So end of my soapbox, mostly. All right, so significant impact items. This is another one of those slides that I think people signed up that they wanted to see. What about part 5, this whole new autonomous vehicles thing? How's that going to affect us? The reality is almost not at all at this point. The existing part 5 low volume roads was spread across the rest of the manual and is essentially, you can find all those same parts are still requirements, options, and guidance. The new part 5 is almost completely a series of guidance and support statements. There's a lot of, this is the one area that the FHWA did not eliminate extraneous material. It is a big download of the most important things you need to know if, as a practitioner, you are going to have to deal with autonomous vehicles on your facilities. It gives a lot of information, not only about fully autonomous vehicles, which are still a ways off, but also for driver assist systems, which are in almost every new car being deployed, and I think the estimate that I heard from Toyota was about 56% of the fleet in the US right now has some sort of driver assist system. So there's a lot of information in Part 5 that's applicable to vehicles that are on your roads every day today. But there's not a lot of shall statements in there. The guidance should statements are very useful. I feel that we should kind of take those as a shot across the bow warning sign that, yes, this is a should statement now, but expect them to be upgraded to shall statements in the future. Some of it is pretty straightforward, and some of it is actually in other parts of the manual as shall statements in the NPA. One example I'll give, and this will come up later as I go into the detailed analysis, edge lines and longitudinal pavement markings. New standard is going to be that if you have a roadway that has a speed limit higher than 40 miles an hour, so 45 and above, longitudinal lines must be 6 inches wide for a normal line. In Part 5, it gives that as guidance as should be, but the new language in Part 3 says shall be. Part 5 says that all longitudinal lines should be 6 inches regardless of speed, whereas the new standard in Part 3 is only for the higher speed roadways. But that's an example of the type of thing that you'll see. A couple of other examples of the guidance are that in Part 5 gives guidance that you should not use non-reflective pavement markers in place of painted longitudinal lines. You're still allowed to use them in Part 3 markings, but this is a very obvious warning shot, as I said, that eventually for driver assist systems and automated vehicles, there's probably going to be a shall statement coming up that bans buttons in the future. The state of California has already done that. Another example is, and this one actually made most of us chuckle when we saw it. The current version of cameras that are used in driver assist systems and autonomous vehicles are not very high refresh rates. So when you have a low refresh rate on an LED indication, whether that's a signal indication or a variable message sign, or any place that you have an LED, it is fairly frequent that the camera shutter and the refresh rate of the LEDs sync up, and the camera only sees that indication in either a solid on or a solid off state. So to resolve this, the vehicle manufacturers, rather than taking a financial hit and upgrading their cameras, have asked the FHWA to provide guidance that any LED indication that we use should refresh at greater than 200 hertz. Now, I've talked to several manufacturers of our LED signal indications, and they've indicated to me that using their current system, they could not boost our current refresh rates above that 200 hertz mark. That it would take significant new hardware materials and design for each of our signal indications to meet that, and that would drive our prices up significantly. So that's something for us to all keep an eye out as we move forward. as I said, yeah.
Hey, we're getting towards the end of our 1 hour, so I want to make sure that we get some of the questions answered.
First off, what would you say is the one or two of the biggest, most impactful changes to day-to-day operations?
Biggest impact for cost. Let me see if I can run through this real quick. FHWA identified 8 substantive revisions that they expect will cost money. Those 8 revisions, one of them is weight limit signs. There's a new standard that the symbol on the sign must match what the vehicle that it's regulating looks like. So if you're regulating 2 axles, then a 2-axle truck. If you're regulating multi-axle or multi-trailer vehicles, that's what the symbol has to look like. One of the big questions is, well, what if you're regulating all of those trucks? Do you have to have 3 separate signs? Longitudinal line widths for roadways above 40 or 45 miles an hour and above. Longitudinal lines must be 6 inches wide for a normal line and 10 inches wide for a wide line. If you're still a city that uses raised pavement markers for your lines, I couldn't find a 6-inch wide raised pavement marker that was not a jiggle bar or too tall of a profile. So we're going to have some issues there. There's markings for diverging diamonds. Basically, they're saying that if you have a diverging diamond, the island separating opposite directions has to be a raised island. It can't be a painted island. Accessible pedestrian signals. They are not requiring accessible pedestrian signals. However, what they are saying is that if you have them, then, first there's a lot of guidance on whether you should put them in or not, that may raise liability issues. And if you do have them, there's a lot of new requirements on placement and operation and design of those that will cost some additional money. Stop and yield sign on bicycle facilities. If you've got bicycle facilities, separated bikeways, or it says bicycle facilities, as vague as that is, and a bicycle is required to stop or yield to conflicting traffic, you're required to put signs up for the bicycle. There's a slide here on each of those that you can look through with my comments. Top things that I noticed in here, MUTCD has several sections that have been added to define how the manual is used and who should be the user. It very explicitly states that you are not allowed to use non-compliant devices. And, we always had, under the current manual, had, well, if I want to do something non-compliant, I can always ask for FHWA experimentation status, wink, wink. In the new manual, there are standard statements. You shall use experimentation, and you shall provide reports on your experimentation to the FHWA on a specified schedule. So that there's a whole new section on experimentation that was never there before. Also, there is a specific standard requiring that all traffic control devices in the U.S. must comply with the MUTCD. That was always kind of a vague thing before, on if it isn't permitted, but it isn't restricted, can I still use it? Well, now it's stated, no, you cannot use it. Also, there's a section that MUTCD is for use by authorized and qualified individuals, and it gives a strict definition of professional engineer. You take those two standards together, and basically it says you have to be a registered professional engineer, and or somebody working directly under a registered professional engineer in order to implement, design, or be in charge of traffic control devices.
Robert, we've got a few other questions that I'd like to get to. Is the provision for longitudinal lines a requirement? There are many municipalities that do not use them on curved streets.
So once again, the longitudinal lines are, if it's a low volume roadway, there are caveats for not using them still on low volume roadways, narrow roadways. That came out of that part 5 that's being deleted. That's still, those have still been moved. There's still the guidance that, within or on an approach to a higher speed street or a higher volume street, you should install, a short distance of center line, things like that. But otherwise, those requirements have not been changed.
Will this change to the MUTCD result in significant changes to the TMUTCD?
Yes. And once again, significant that there's the Texas manual can be more restrictive than the federal manual, but it cannot allow things that are no longer allowed in the federal manual. So there will be some notable changes to the Texas MUTCD. There are things that are in the national manual in 2009 that are not allowed in the current Texas manual, and that's fine. That probably won't change. Go ahead.
This will be the last question. If you have any other questions, feel free to email Robert Saylor. I believe he has included his email address in this presentation at the beginning. So the last question, will there be guidance to the 4-foot wide flush median centerline pavement markings? This is mainly being used in the rural FM roads.
There is some commentary in there about flush medians that is more extensive than what's in the current manual. And I've looked through that a little bit because I've got a current case that I'm expert witness on regarding that. But yeah, so there is some additional information, at least support information there. All right, so part 5, there's only a single standard statement in the entire part, and it's a restatement of new requirements contained in part 6 on temporary traffic controls, which are fairly significant, particularly, and like I said, it's a standard in part 6 for long-term temporary traffic control zones, construction zones. There are some significant requirements now on having new markings in place before you open up the an alternate route, and incorrect markings for whatever the current configuration must be obliterated in a timely manner. And it has some very strict wording on that everybody needs to take a look at. FHWA is required to provide the analysis to the OMB on anticipated cost to implement the new rules and identify any unfunded mandates. FHWA identified 8 substantive revisions that they say have quantifiable economic impacts. Only 3 of those revisions did they determine costs that could be measured, and they did not specify which 3 of those 8. They listed the 8, but they didn't specify which 3. And their estimate, that last bullet, for those 3 revisions where costs can be quantified, the 10-year cost in 2018 dollars is just under $600,000. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a hard time believing that anything could be rolled out nationwide over 10 years for less than $1 million. change. So take that with the grain of salt. The 8 substantive revisions, I kind of ran through those earlier. I'll jump through each one of those. Normal and wide longitude line widths. Normal width line for 45 and above is 6 inches, and then 4 to 6 inches for 40 miles an hour and lower. Wide line, 8 inches if you use a 4 or 5 inch normal, and 10 inches if you use a 6 inch normal. So 10 inches if it's 45 miles an hour or above. Accessible pedestrian signals. 4K01 does not have a new requirement mandating that you install APS. However, it does have a lot of new rules on placement, speech messages versus percussive tones, and requiring vibrotactile arrows. There's a question about RRFBs. There's an entirely new section, section 4L, which is all about RRFBs. There are some significant differences in the proposed rule from what the interim approval allows. So if you have RRFBs or you're looking to install them, the new 4L is something you need to look at. 4L02, 4J02, those other locations, basically all of those are saying they're guidance statements, so they are shoulds, not shalls. And the should statement is that accessible pedestrian signals should be installed at basically anything that's pedestrian actuated. That makes sense. It's not a shall statement. It is just a should statement, but it's there and will cost you money. Stop and yield lines. Basically, it changes some of the ambiguity in the existing manual. Says that if you have a yield line pavement marking, you will have a yield here to bicycles or peds sign with it. Previously, it was an option. Now it's a standard shall statement. Same thing, below. Some more about yield here and stop here to pedestrian. If yield or stop lines are used at a crosswalk that crosses an uncontrolled multi-lane approach, you must have a sign supplementing it. Weight limit signs. I put the standard, the quote is there. It's very, I haven't had to put a new weight limit sign in a decade or more. But my reading of it says, shows that, whoops, didn't mean to do that. My reading of that says that if you have multiple configurations of single unit, single trailer, or multi-trailer, that you're going to have separate signs for each of those, which doesn't make sense to me. Stop and yield signs on bicycle facilities. The parts that are not bolded are in the manual today. The parts that are bolded are new. So before, stop and yield signs were required on shared use paths at bicyclists, where bicyclists are required to stop or yield. But they've now added the words separated bikeways or other bicycle facilities. So if you have a bicycle facility, a bike lane that has to stop or yield, this tells me you have to have a sign there, even if it's otherwise an uncontrolled approach. Something to think about. As I said, there's new requirements for markings for diamond interchanges with transposed alignment crossroad. That's a diverging diamond. I had to look it up. But there is requirements for those markings. In the text, it says, refer to figure 3B-29. If you go to the figure file for part 3, there is no 3B-29 figure in that proposed figure file. This is one of those things that you find as you start digging through the system. Then there's a whole new section on markings for part-time travel on a shoulder. So shoulder running operations are now defined, and what you can and can't do and what you have to have to mark and sign it is in there. Said FHW opinion is more restrictive than permissive now. So once again, they say if it's not mentioned in the MUTCD, that means it is not allowed. I mentioned this. Actually, I went over this slide. So I'll skip to the next one. So section 1C01 allows deviation from a standard with a documented engineering study. Section 1D05 takes that further, and this is an information section in relation to documented engineering study. But the last part of this is site-specific conditions might result in the determination that it is impossible or impractical to comply with a standard. In such a case, a deviation from the requirement of a particular standard at that location might be the only possibility. In such limited specific cases, the deviation is allowed, provided that the agency or official having jurisdiction fully document through engineering study the engineering basis for the deviation. This is important. Part 8 and Part 9, railroad at-grade crossings and bicycle facilities. Both have been almost entirely rewritten. If you've got rail at-grade crossings or bicycle facilities that you're in charge of, you need to read the new sections. They are, most of what is in there agrees with recommendations and requests by the National Committee, technical committees for those parts, but they're pretty significant. One of the things, I think I've got the slide. Yeah, so this is a huge wall of text, but it's critical. Basically, and this is a shall statement, this is a must statement. If you have an at-grade rail crossing and you decide you need to make an operational change, that includes changes to traffic signals that are close enough to affect the grade crossing, implementation of quiet zones, other implementations that will affect the grade crossing, then you must assemble a diagnostics team that consists of agents of the railroad or transit agency, agents and people who are with the regulatory agency that has statutory responsibility. So if you're a city, you and the railroad have to get together, and your diagnostic team has to meet on site and come to a consensus on what the change is going to be and what the possible consequences are. And that agreement must be reached before you can make those changes. This is definitely something that was requested by the railroad or the railroads that got tired of agencies going out and making changes at grade crossings without consulting the railroad. This means, though, that if you want to do something at a grade crossing, the railroad can just look at it and say, no, I disagree, don't do it. And now you would have to be in violation of the MUTCD if you went forward. That's a big change. Some more of the specifics, and these, I reshuffled all of these multiple times as far as what was more important than others. mostly it's what are you working on? What are your problems right now that you're working on? So new section 2A04 forbids using a word sign in place of a symbol sign. If there's a symbol sign that's allowed, you're not allowed to use a word sign instead. If there's a officially approved word sign, you're not allowed to use a different word sign that means the same thing. You have to use the same word sign. If there's not an approved symbol sign or not an approved word sign, then you can develop a new word sign, but you must document that you've evaluated it for clarity and comprehension. So once again, another big restriction on the flexibility that we've had previously. Median opening treatments. So the current manual, there's a lot of discussion about 30-foot or wider medians, or medians that are between 30 feet and 80 feet. And all of that has been replaced throughout the manual with wording that says that you where before it said a 30-foot or wider median or 30 to 80-foot median, now it says that if the left turns across the median, if the left turn paths cross and there is storage space for a vehicle within the median area, that's when you have to consider it as two separate intersections and have two separate sets of control for it. If you happen to have a wide median at a really wide intersection, like many that I have in Plano, and the left turn paths don't cross and there is no spot for storage in the middle, well, that's okay. I can now treat that as one intersection, just a very large intersection. A lot of the guidance and requirements have reduced the requirement for one-way signs and do not enter signs on divided roadways. However, the requirement is still in there that you have to have a keep right sign at a minimum at all median noses on divided highways. So that's something almost none of us have implemented. We were supposed to be compliant years ago. But that's a significant increase in cost and maintenance for all of us. Section 1A03, we actually now have a new section defining target road users, and those are defined as operators of vehicles, including bicycles and pedestrians. So that, in conjunction with everything else, tells us that we must include all of those targeted road users in our engineering decisions on traffic control. There's a new section 2B06. This is a good change. It specifically states as a standard now that yield and stop signs shall not be used for speed control. So now we can definitely point to the MUTCD and say, see, I'm not allowed to do it. Moving on. Section 4D02 and signals. There's guidance that says pedestrian signal heads should be installed at each marked crosswalk at a location controlled by a traffic control signal. It's still not a shall, but it is a higher level of requirement than we had before. And it's something that if you have a pedestrian incident at a traffic signal and don't have pedestrian signal heads, but do have a marked crosswalk, that puts liability on the city. Section 4F17. I'm not going to soapbox on this. I will say, though, that FHWA reference documents have been updated to include the new ITE recommended practice on clearance, traffic signal clearance intervals. This results in yellow times between 3 and 7 seconds and the guidance that restricted maximum red clearance intervals to 6 seconds, that section has been deleted. Now I will say the new recommended practice is extremely controversial. That's a subject for an entirely different presentation. AASHTO and the committee that produced the recommended practice have both formally asked ITE to rescind it as a recommended practice. And FHWA has funded an NCHRP research study on clearance intervals to help develop a new recommended practice that is based on experimentation. So that I'll leave that there. Significant impact items. During transition into preempt control, the flash don't walk is allowed to be shortened for boat or rail preemption, but not emergency vehicle preemption. How significant that is, is up to people. Ow. Where'd that go? There it is. I'm trying to scroll comments in the other window. Okay. Flashing yellow arrow signs are still required to just be words. The symbolic flashing arrow is not allowed. Hawk signal, another big difference in the current manual, hawk signals must be at least 200 feet from the nearest cross street. Now they're saying that they can be located at intersections, and there's a requirement that the intersecting street must have stop control. Pedestrian channelizing devices, 6K02. Part 6 is temporary traffic control, and there are significant new requirements and guidance on handling pedestrians and bicycles in and around work zones. It's going to be much more significant than what we had in the current manual. 6M02, longitudinal traffic barriers. This is a new standard, but it gives you some leeway, but this is one of those sections where the guidance was changed to a standard to reflect CFR, work zone safety management measures. CFR, that's federal regulation. So this is an area where something was beefed up in the MUTCD because of laws that were passed for other purposes. We'll move on. Here's a couple of things. So language has been added generally throughout the appropriate places in the manual to allow LEDs inside the border of signs, specifically to increase conspicuity. There's some strict limitations on how they may be used. Some of them can be used actuated. Some can be like stop and yield signs. If you're going to have LED lights inside of a stop or yield sign, they must flash continuously. They cannot be actuated. They cannot be by time of day. One of the things that is throughout the manual also is that you cannot use flashing LEDs in a sign to indicate that condition is currently present. So flashing LEDs inside of a school speed limit sign, you can have those. They can be by time of day, but they cannot be the only thing that indicates that school zone is active. You also have to have a traditional round yellow warning beacon along with it. And that is Another one indication that where this has to be used is ramp signals. If you have ramp signals, you can't use flashing LEDs to indicate that the ramp signal is active. You must have an additional warning beacon. Section on vehicle speed feedback signs. How many of us have seen the white on black your speed is signs with the flashing slow down? That's not allowed under the new manual. They must be black on yellow as warning signs. They're not allowed to flash, and they're not allowed to show alternate messages. The bike symbol share the road sign has been deleted. It's no longer an allowed sign. Now it is a bike symbol with either in street or in road along with the bike symbol. It was found that the share the road sign is too liable to be misunderstood. Neither bicyclists nor drivers really understood what that meant and what they were being told to do. So FHWA has updated that. If we have anybody from my good friends at City of Richardson, this next one is going to hit hard there. Advanced street name signs. In Richardson, we always considered advanced street name signs to be informational signs, which let us put them up white letters on informational blue, Richardson blue, signs. In two different sets of complementary standards, FHWA is stating that advanced street name signs are specifically shall be considered guide signs, and they shall be white lettering on a green background. So Richardson will have to make and any other city that uses something other than white on green for advanced street name signs is going to have to make the decision of, do we violate the manual, or do we update all of our signs? There's also new strict standards for community wayfinding signs. A lot of communities that have wayfinding signs right now, their standard, their signs are not going to fit the new standard. Same thing for city limit signs. Now, it's jurisdictional boundary signs, so it applies to state boundaries and county boundaries if those are marked, but specifically city limit signs, there is now a specific standard shall statement for what those have to look like. Jonathan, for your question, yes, this will be provided on the website. Strict standards for changeable message signs. And this is going to hit Texas pretty hard because we love, TxDOT loves to have their funny little messages to remind people to drive safe and not drink and drive and all of those. And we've got silver alerts and clear alerts. I still don't know what a clear alert is. And all sorts of other alerts that get posted. Under the new manual, they have very strict standards for what messages are allowed to be on a changeable message sign, to the point that just like with any other word sign, they have standard messages that you're allowed to use, and you're only allowed to deviate from those for under certain conditions. So that's a new area that is going to change things. Let's see next. If you have mid-block pedestrian crossings, you're now required to have crosswalk markings at mid-block pedestrian crossings. That's not an option anymore. It's a shall. There's a whole new section with crosswalk warrants, guidance, and design requirements. So that's going to be something that we're all going to have to look at and see. And then Section 4H is a completely new section in signals that talks about bicycle signals, including standards on implementation and warrants on when they should be considered and when they might or might not be used. All right, so I made it through everything in only an extra 40 minutes.
Excellent. We had a few other questions come in for people that are still on. Requirements for one-way signs for the wide median roadways. Is there any timeline on adding that to the MUTCD?
Could you repeat that again?
The requirements for one-way signs and wide medians. Is there any timeline on adding that to the MUTCD?
Okay, so there's currently requirements on that in the 2009 manual. The notice of proposed amendment relaxes some of those requirements and allows, so the do not enter signs and the one-way signs that were previously required now mostly become options. There are some caveats to that, but mostly those become optional. However, the requirement for a keep right sign on the median nose, essentially, for the approaching directions, has not been relaxed. So we're still going to have those keep right signs. And when those relaxations happen, will be whenever the NPA goes to a final rule.
You might have mentioned this already, but when does this new version go into effect?
Okay, so at the earliest, probably November. Well, okay, so November 2022 would probably be the earliest that FHWA enters it as a final rule, which means that Texas has up to 2 years to adopt it, which would be end of 2024, beginning of 2025. Now, one of the benefits we have is, and I'm not certain exactly when this occurred, but it used to be, I believe, that the legislature had to accept the new version of the manual, but at some point in the past, that got changed so that now it only takes action by the Texas Transportation Commission to adopt the new manual. So we won't need to wait for a legislative session for it to be adopted in Texas. We will have to wait for our friends down in Austin at TxDOT to get the new final rule, make whatever changes they feel appropriate to Texas, and then issue it as a new Texas manual. And like I said, that's probably, we're looking at 2024, early 2025.